Hi everybody, this is going to be the first video covering Nf3 E6 Sicilians. So far we've covered a repertoire against both knight c6 and d6, which are the most common moves. Later on we'll have a look at less common moves like g6 and knight to f6. But for now we're still on our way to deal with one of the other major moves, which is e6. Now, normally speaking, I personally prefer to go for d4 here, as the type of open Sicilians that arise here are a little different from those after d6 and knight c6. Think about, for example, a Taimanov that I like to play as black. That's an opening that can appear over here. However, it does require a large range of theory and a large range of knowledge, which is not to everyone's taste. And it was actually recently that I was inspired to review one of the lines I also covered in my Taimanov series, one of the anti-Sicilians here, when Garry Kasparov returned to play some chess in St. Louis, a blitz tournament, and he went for the move b3. And he actually came up with an idea that I quite liked and I think is very interesting to try out. Therefore, it's going to be my suggestion for a wide repertoire, because it doesn't, once again, require that much theoretical knowledge, and it leaves a lot of space for creativity, this line. I think at this point a lot of players actually like to still go for it because it's not as analyzed as c3 and g3, which I also covered, and if you're interested you can have a look at those lines, but I don't think there's too many new ideas available there. But b3 is still very much developing, and I'd like to start off by looking at the move b6 over here. b6 is what I recommended in my Taimanov series, and we mostly covered the move bishop to b2, bishop b7, queen e2 over here, after which knight c6, knight c3, A6 was my recommendation, played by Vladimir Potkin, and ever since I believe that several strong players have followed this line with A6 and B5, trying to set up some sort of attack once the white king castles queenside. And I still believe that this is a very decent option for black, and it gives black a good game. However, Kasparov actually introduced this idea of bishop to d3, which, even though it had been played before, was not really commonly seen. And I think there's definitely some venom to this move. There's a couple of ideas that I'm not quite sure how black should deal with, although I do think that black should be okay. But let's have a look. So first of all, bishop to b7, short castle. White's idea is really that obviously we probably still want to put the bishop to b2, but in some cases we might think about playing c3, d4, depending on what black does. And also the main idea of this line is really that black is suffering a little bit to develop his knight on g8. Wesley So actually played the move knight to f6 here, and after e5, knight to d5, this is generally something that black should try not to go for, allowing e5 like this. But after bishop to e4, queen c7, Garry Kasparov actually got a good position by playing rook to e1 over here. But I think that even c4 would have been stronger directly, kicking out the knight from d5 and then trying to gain more space in the center by d4. I think during the game Garry must have been afraid of the move knight to e3, but it turns out that after bishop takes b7, knight takes d1, bishop takes a8, even though it might look a little strange at first, white's actually going to win material as we're picking up the knight, but the bishop will be able to return back into the game without being trapped. So knight to e3 is not really a good option here for black at all. And so c4 seems to be a slight improvement over that game. Knight to b4 looks like the most logical reply to me. And after takes d4, as I said, c takes d4, knight takes d4. I think this is a type of position which is definitely very pleasant for white. We've got this sort of outpost on e5 that we can support by bishop to b2 and knight to f3 back. Also sometimes we can swing over the queen. But most of all, we just have a nice space advantage, and black will always have to deal with this backward d-pawn, which once he plays it up might actually also cause this bishop on b2 to be very active. So for example, knight c6, knight f3 seems to me like a very nice position for white. I would play probably something like bishop to b2, knight c3, knight e4 next. And yeah, this is definitely not a good opening position for black. So already there we see that if black just goes for normal moves like knight f6 over here, he can get into some trouble quite quickly. Now I think that there are some other decent moves here. For example, d6 can be played, and after bishop to b2, Black could try to play that move e5, which is positionally speaking quite a smart move because it shuts out our bishop altogether. But now we see this plan of c3 d4 appear, and I do think that this is also a little bit better for white. After knight f6, rook e1, pretty much regardless of what black does, we want to play bishop to c2 and d4. And after bishop e2, bishop e7, bishop c2, I think we reach a very fine position. Play could continue maybe something like knight d7 over here, and here I think white, for example, could be considering taking and then c4, opening up the bishop again, and also white might have access to the square on d5, to give you an example. But in general, once white gets the grip on the center like this, he should be better in almost any case. Also knight to d2 could be a very decent move here. So I don't think that positional idea with d6, e5 is the right way for black to go about it here either. Instead, it's probably the move knight c6 which should be placed first. Now knight c6, as indicated by arrows, has a very clear idea. We want to go knight to b4, which is disturbing the bishop on d3, and we would have a problem because, of course, we don't want to let black take on d3, but we also have to defend our e-pawn. So over here, rook to e1 would be the right way to make some space on f1 for the bishop and defend the pawn. And once again, if black wants to go for knight f6 over here, he will run into similar issues if he goes for this type of position. For example, bishop to e7 over here, c4, knight c7, d4, and we see that play is not all that different. Over here, obviously black already managed to develop his bishop, but we still have a very pleasant space advantage over here, and I don't think that black is really able to equalize easily from a position like this. So once again, we see that black is struggling to develop the knight, and the best way to probably go about it is to go bishop to e7 over here. Now already the type of play that I'm going to show you now does not strike me as very natural for black. That's why I feel that there's something to say for this line. After bishop to b2, we're attacking on g7. Now black should go knight to f6. And after e5, I only really found one way for black to sort of equalize, I think, which is the strange looking move knight to h5. Once again, knight to d5 I just don't think is good enough. Our play is always quite straightforward. We could go with c4 here as well, but d4 right away also gives us a good position. And c4 next. And once again, the position resembles a lot of what we've seen already. However, knight to h5 makes some sense because if the knight is not getting into trouble on the rim, he will be able to play d6 or f6 and sort of get rid of this strong e-pawn, which is really what we've been playing for in all these previous lines. Now over here I tried to make several ideas work for white related to getting rid of this knight on f3 to attack on h5, but it seems to be sort of alright for black, although I still don't think that this is something that most players will be very comfortable with doing. So that already indicates that for the moment I haven't really found a very natural way for black to get a decent position. If it's depending on ideas like this, I really think that there's something to say for this line. Anyway, so bishop to f1 seems to me like the most natural move to get out of this knight f4 idea, and also we want to probably go g3, bishop g2, shutting out the knight even further and taking away that f4 square. I think castle is the most logical move here, and after g3, black has now two options, either f6 or d6. d6, bishop to g2 still leaves some problems for black to be answered. As we can see, after d takes e5, knight takes e5, actually black is already struggling, and having to play g6 over here doesn't strike me as something too great either. For example, white could strike with d4 over here, and I think it might be a little bit better for white. So that leaves f6 as the main option, and over here I think once again bishop to g2, g6. g6 still not a very nice move, but to me it makes a little bit more sense in combination with f6, as black's orienting his play a little bit more on the king side now rather than playing g6 whilst playing in the center. And for example, white could continue developing here with knight to a3, and let's say pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, queen c8, and after several exchanges I still quite like white's position over here. I think we will play d4 next. We have some pressure potentially in the center. We have pretty active piece play. And for example, after bishop f6, I would not go for the trade right away, but play d4. And for example, if black decides to trade everything on d4, I do think that this is more pleasant. Once again, his knight is still out of play. Also, we have very straightforward ideas to put some pressure on those central pawns. And we do not really have any clear weakness here as white. So that's really it for b6. Once again, for those who are now shaking their head and asking themselves what to do as black, I do think that as a timeout player, this is not your biggest worry, but I still think that this is a line that needs a little bit more research, because I quite frankly haven't been able to find exactly what to do, and I do think the positions are kind of fresh and new, so that makes it a little bit more interesting. This is really the start of a new chapter in the b3 variation, and I think some games will be featured over here and we'll see more developments. But as you could see, as of now, the main problem here for black is really that knight to f6, whenever black goes for it, e5 will be played, and that's difficult to deal with. Another thing is that if black does want to play, let's say, d6 and then knight to f6, we will always get into a position like this, which, once again, it's not to everyone's taste. White's plays, again, quite straightforward. He wants to go a4, knight a3, knight c4, and then potentially at some point, let's say, some position like this. He wants to go queen e2, rook e1, and probably f4. And even though some people might be okay with this type of position, I once again feel that white's play is a little bit easier, and it can be a bit scary for black having these two bishops aim at black's king. So this should be fun for white to play, and definitely something worth trying. So I hope you like this suggestion for white. Next time we're going to be looking at all the other variations, because obviously b6 is not a forced move after b3, but it is the most topical line and probably the line that you will face when playing an experienced player. So this is my suggestion. I hope you like it. Once again, I try to keep things relatively simple, but it is a line that that deserves some mentioning and deserves some more development and research. So I hope you go out to play it, and I'll see you in the next video to have a look at what to play against all the other moves that black